Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. CMC connects people and ideas through community conversations at forums just like this one nearly every week. I'm Ellen Block, an independent international tax consultant. I'm also very proud to serve on the CMC's Board of Trustees as Treasurer and Chair of the Finance Committee. For those of you joining us by live stream, we're coming to you from the Ellis in Columbus's historic Italian village. Welcome, everyone. If you scan the QR codes on your tables, you can learn more about today's forum, take a short survey, and see the many organizations that support your not-for-profit Columbus Metropolitan Club. Speaking of supporters, we are so grateful to today's forum partner, the Columbus Dispatch. We're also grateful to the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation. Our live stream partner, the Columbus Dispatch, once again, and our host, the Ellis. Every CMC forum takes a village. Let's thank everyone for supporting today's program. There's a good reason totalitarian nations don't allow freedom of the press, or why a former US president labeled the news media an enemy of the people. It's because the free press and democracy draw strength from each other. When one fails or is deliberately targeted for destruction, the other is likely to also be a casualty. Today, we dive into the importance of a free press and the role of journalism and the role journalism plays in keeping democracy vigorous. Please welcome today's distinguished panelists, Rita McNeil Danish, the CEO of Signal Ohio, Dr. Kelly Garrett, Director of the School of Communication at The Ohio State University, Michael Shearer, the Executive Editor of the Columbus Dispatch, and our host, returning once again to the CMC podium, Rodney Dunigan, the Assistant News Director with ABC6. Rodney, welcome back to CMC, and we look forward to today's conversation.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. Looking forward to a spirited conversation. This is definitely topical for us in the media, obviously, with this being election time. You hear that, fake news, real news all the time. So I'm looking forward to some of the answers from you guys. And I guess I'll just start out. This is going to be a free-flowing conversation. From each of you, I just want to go down the line. Your definition of fake news. What is fake news, and is that a reality?
Are we starting with Rita?
Yes,
with Mike?
We'll start with Rita.
So I think it's kind of obvious what fake news is. It is the misinformation. It is information that is not founded on anything, based upon any facts. The lawyer in me says, are there any criteria, evidence that can prove that fact? And oftentimes it's just bizarre and weird. So it is real, it is alive, and there is fake news.
So I agree with that. I would amend it to say that there are actually a bunch of different things that constitute what we sometimes refer kind of lazily as fake news, right? You have on one end the well-intentioned but misleading content that you might see, for example, in the form of satire. This kind of information isn't necessarily intended to deceive, but it can nonetheless. At the other extreme, you have falsehoods created from whole cloth. That's obviously deceptive. But in the middle, you have all kinds of interesting variations. Claims that are taken out of context, claims that are using images that are real but are captioned as if they were something that they're not. So misinformation, disinformation, misleading content, all of these things are part of this very complicated information ecosystem. It's not always easy or clear to make attributions about whether it's intentional or exactly how harmful it is going to be, but it's part of this problem space that we have to deal with.
I think I'll start by defining what it's not. It's not news that you disagree with or don't like. I think that's the big misperception that's out there. If you disagree with something or don't like a piece of news, that makes it fake news. That's not true, obviously. And fake news is everywhere. It pervades our lives today. Our fake information or bad information, however you want to phrase that. It's on social media in constant streams. You see pictures of crowds that are misleading because they scan the empty end of the arena instead of the full arena to show how many people are at a venue, things like that. There is bad information out there everywhere, and unless it comes from a trusted media source of your mainstream media, I know the phrase gets bandied around a lot, but it is what we publish or what most of all the major media publish has gone through a process to make sure it's accurate and fair and as complete as possible. So I think it's that's the real news obviously out there for all of us to consume.
All right, and we'll bounce around a bit with these questions. Michael, I'll start with you with this one. Totalitarian regimes don't permit freedom of press and routinely throw journalists in jail or possibly worse. I'm just meeting you guys, but you all seem like nice people, so hopefully that's the case. Why the fear there? Why is it so scary for authoritarians? What's so scary about the free press?
Well, I think anytime you're in power, things that challenge your power are scary. I mean, it's understandable to some degree. At least in the United States, if you work hard to be elected, you want to maintain that job and do well at it and preserve your role and get reelected, all those good things. So I think it's just that power can be intoxicating too, right? So if you have power to make decisions and shape things, it's not something you easily want to give up. So whenever there's a threat to that, whether it's perceived as a journalist public records request or a journalist asking questions you don't want to answer, it clearly creates some unease, and that's how our country was built to function. That's how our founders saw us working. It's why we have a First Amendment giving freedom of the press to the media. So I think that's probably the simplest answer, is that when you were in power, you want to stay there, and when you have people who can threaten you or endanger that, you have some perfectly natural reaction to that. But in our country, we have systems built to protect media and protect the people who challenge their government, whether it's a reporter or a citizen going to counsel and saying, this is the wrong decision.
And Rita, when we talk about fake news, a lot of times we're talking about politics. Obviously, this has been election season. Do you think that it's always important for journalists to be nonpartisan, or should journalists always be nonpartisan on issues?
That's a fascinating question. So what I would say is, from our perspective, from my perspective, that the nonpartisan is important. I think that all journalists would agree that it is their role to provide news and information, to provide facts, and allow people to make informed decisions based upon those facts. And so if you are providing just good news and information, if you are providing quality news and information, then you allow people to make free choice. That information becomes power. And so back to your other question, part of the problem is if you give people information which allows them to make free choices, then you're no longer controlling the message. And so I think it's important that we stay nonpartisan so that we make sure that people make free choices, but they have all the information, all the details, all the facts they need to do so.
And Dr. Kelly, obviously your research looks into the internet, obviously a lot of interest there. How have recent U.S. presidential elections shown us how the internet shapes the flow of political misperceptions? And what's the relationship between online news organizations, their exposure to the falsehoods, and possibly their rebuttals and beliefs?
Right, okay, so that's a quick, short answer there. So yes, we know that misinformation is shared online. You have all seen it, right? Every one of you has had the experience of getting someone sharing something, and you're like, that can't be right. But we also know that empirically, when we look at the cross-section of what most Americans see, the vast majority of it is actually accurate. Misinformation is a tiny fraction of the information environment, but it's striking, because in part it's usually novel. If you make something up, you probably haven't seen it before. It does, at least on some platforms, it has a reputation for spreading quickly. But that doesn't mean it's inevitable. Like, there are other platforms in which misinformation is spread less quickly than on social media, rather than true information. And one of the most I've found in my work so far is that use of social media platforms is not associated with large changes in people's ability to tell the difference between truths and falsehoods. It's certainly the case that people see falsehoods online from time to time, but it doesn't seem to be the case that merely using social media is making us all tremendously vulnerable to this kind of misinformation. There are people who are more vulnerable to it, but it's not clear that social media is the driving force.
And Michael, this one is for you. Especially this is important, I think, from a local media perspective. Why do you think so many Americans mistrust the media?
Well, I think it goes to just the political divisions that are so evident in our daily life right now. There's obviously significant disagreements among many people in our society today on politics and the issues of societal issues of the day. I think that creates an environment where, like I said earlier, the information you don't like, it's easy to label it as fake news. Obviously, the former president made a lot of comments that you referenced earlier, or someone referenced earlier, about the media being the enemy of the people. And obviously, I strongly disagree with that characterization. But I think that kind of mindset has set into our cover of how people perceive the media and how people react to us and how they interact with us now than compared to 20, 30 years ago when I was doing this. So it's a much different environment that we're in overall. I mean, our politics have just gotten a lot more personal and a lot more heated, I guess would be the right word. So I think that is really the main ingredient in this, that there's just a lot more people who disagree and they're doing it openly. And I think, I don't have the science behind this, but I think also social media plays a role in that you can segregate yourself more and more into different communities that are more like you, that you can find people who are more not impressed, who agree with you more easily and don't challenge you in your conversations. We lack conversations like this one today, where we are, talking about this important issue in a civil way. So I think that's another part of it too.
And I'll bounce another question off you, just since you're a competitor of ours, and this is something that I always stress about people getting their information from different sources, be it from Channel 6, be it from the Dispatch, be it from Channel 4, be it from Spectrum or different websites. What's the importance, or if you can, stress the importance of, although, you're always pushing for the Dispatch, the importance of folks getting their information from different sources?
Well, I think it's vitally important, especially on national issues and local issues. I mean, you should always be trying to peruse more than one medium. I think that's important. You don't want to be, not that we have a slant or that we're trying to drive things a certain way, but it's always good to see how a second source handles the same story, information they obtain. There's a lot of good reporting that happens in this community every day, and consuming as much of that as possible makes you a better citizen and more educated about what's happening in the Columbus area. So I think it's always good to have more than one source for anything out there.
Can I just jump on top of that question or that response? Excuse me. There is actually some really interesting empirical work looking at who does best at discriminating, at being able to identify misinformation. A lot of the work's based on college students, unsurprisingly. One of the things that we find is that when you tell a college student without coaching, try and figure out, is this article accurate or not, their go-to strategy is to read it very closely, to look for internal contradictions, to find evidence that something about it isn't right. But it turns out that's actually not the best strategy. When you say to those same students, okay, now read wide, not deep, instead of trying to intuit the truth from this one piece of information, look across sources. Do you see the same message? Do you see consistency in terms of the kinds of people being interviewed, the kinds of information being provided, the way the evidence is being interpreted? If you see inconsistencies, then you should probably be skeptical and start trying to find more evidence to try and tie break.
I actually just wanted to piggyback on the mistrust. I think there's a community of folks who no longer trust the media because they feel like they've been misrepresented or they're not going to be fairly represented. And there's a number of communities and individuals who have opted out for that reason because they feel like the news portrays them negatively or certainly not in its most positive light. And so I think a lot of the research demonstrates that they have just opted out completely because they don't trust the news to portray their feelings, their community, their perspectives.
Well, just to piggyback off that, then, what can media professionals do to better connect with the community then, to better, represent? Maybe if they're not in a certain community, how can they, make that connection to build that trust?
Well, I can tell you what we do, and I'd like to think that we're successful at it, and that is we are constantly in touch with the community. We are constantly doing surveys. We are constantly reaching out. We're doing library hours to connect with folks in the community who may not have internet access. We are making sure that we meet the community where they are so that we can build that trust with them, so that we can explain to them how we can be a trusted source, the power of information. And so I think it's really important to kind of go back to grassroots. You know, when you talk about politics today, everybody's saying, let's go back to grassroots campaigning. And I think when we talk about media, let's go back to grassroots. Let's go back to the front porch. Let's talk to people about the issues that matter to them, what is important to them, and let them know that we hear them and then resound exactly what they're saying.
Dr. Kelly, when we talk about misinformation and some of the research you've done in news, where does misinformation in news typically come from, and who actually benefits from it?
Right. So there's not a single answer to that question. First, as I mentioned before, there can be a variety of different types of misinformation. So sometimes misinformation is introduced as a form of humor. Sometimes it's introduced because someone misunderstood what happened, or they saw a clip of the news and they shared it with you, with their social network, but it doesn't represent the whole truth. Sometimes it's strategic, a political actor advancing a narrative because it advantages them. So a shorthand that I've used, power, passion, and profit, these 3 Ps contribute to people's decisions to share things that turn out not to be consistent with the best empirical evidence.
And Michael, when we talk about kind of discerning what's real and what's fake, when you're talking about the public, and I just asked you that question about getting information from different sources, how can the public discern if something is fake news or real news? Is there a way to do that?
Well, I think first of all, you have to look at the sourcing of the story. Is the story sourced by people who would have the expertise to make the comments that they are making in the story or on the TV report? If you know, are they qualified and expert enough to give information on the situation? If you're watching a story about or reading a story and an eyewitness describes what happened versus what the official sources would say would happen, there could be disparities in there, and that's perfectly normal from what people see and what the authorities find out. But you need to, you need to read that information and figure out how credible is it, how likely that is. I mean, everything that we read as editors and reporters, we are scrutinizing how accurate may that be and how fair is it, or how does that seem possible or not. So there's just a lot of information out there anymore that is not always believable if you're not scrutinizing it. You don't know where it came from all the time. So I think just look for the sourcing. Look for, are there documents that the journalists are sharing that they are reporting from? Is there confirmed information to go with the story? That always is very helpful to me in terms of how we analyze content, whether it should be published or not. But so I think you're looking at just the overall picture. Who are the sources? What are the documentation? How reasonable is this? And unfortunately, I think if it sounds too good to be true or too crazy to be true, there's probably a really good chance it's not true, whatever the piece of information is claiming.
And Rita, this is something that a lot of journalists run into, especially now during this political season. What should journalists do when politicians are clearly lying?
Well, I guess I would say the important thing is what we've been doing, which is fact-checking. At the end of the day, truth wills out. I don't know how many people are old enough to remember the facts and nothing but the facts. So if you can point out to individuals that I fact-checked and here is the truth, then not only have you identified the flaw, but you also have come up with a solution so people know the truth, know the actual information, and aren't misled.
And Dr. Kelly, talk about AI and the role that's now playing in fake news. I've seen so many different videos of speeches and just different pictures that are obviously fake, but if you aren't paying attention, you wouldn't know. Just how is that playing a role in today's political kind of season, and what sort of dangers could that pose for us in the future?
So first, I want to say one quick thing about Rita's comment. There is at least a decade ago, there was a worry that fact-checking might not work. That, in fact, maybe it would have the countervailing effect, push people to believe things. Best evidence suggests, no, fact-checking absolutely works. You're not going to have a huge effect. A single fact-check is not going to change someone's mind, but you can move them just a little bit, and collectively, when a lot of people move, that's what makes the biggest difference. All right, so to the question of AI, this is a moving target, right? We see the ability to create synthetic images and synthetic text, things that no human ever said, drew, did, that are remarkably compelling and can be very hard to differentiate from real content. So on the one hand, that is worrisome in the sense that it raises the possibility that people will be fooled by these fake pieces of content generated by machines. But right now, I said misinformation is a relatively small part of our information ecosystem. AI-generated misinformation is just tiny, absolutely tiny. So for right now, my bigger concern is the people who use the claim that something is AI as a way of dismissing real evidence. I never said that. That recording was false. That picture was AI generated. That isn't what really happened. For right now, I think the immediate concern is how do we make sure that people can continue to believe the evidence that we have produced, that news organizations like these are producing every day, and say that's really important and real. I will say finally, on the front of AI, there are actually a bunch of tells. We can still, human beings can be trained pretty quickly, pretty easily to distinguish between real and fake content, even when it's generated by machines.
Michael, this is an important question, and one I definitely want to know because I think it impacts, newspapers, magazines, television stations. How has the closure of small market local journalism outlets impacted the overall media landscape across the country?
Well, I can't speak to the whole country. I can speak more to Ohio. I mean, clearly there are fewer working journalists here in Ohio today than any point in our modern history, and that obviously is clearly a problem. And I think there's been a significant change in that, not so much here in Columbus, although it's been significant here in Columbus too, but also in your smaller towns. So it's fewer people that are going out and gathering facts and checking what public officials say and asking questions, asking for records, and doing all the activities that we do every day here. So obviously, I think that is a challenge that our state and our communities have to face. How do you get more journalism to be supportive of our democratic process? So I think absolutely it's a concern. But there are, still a lot of great journalism going on in the small towns across Ohio and everywhere, and we support that in our company through the networking of our State House Bureau and things like that to provide them with, as good a journalism as we can provide for all of the markets in Ohio. So.
And Rita, it looked like you wanted to kind of jump on that.
I do, because I want to talk about the cause and effect. So having these news deserts and these lack of local news organizations in our smaller communities or rural communities, Appalachia, there are studies that show that a community without a newspaper ultimately is not civically engaged, does not engage in its community, and ultimately does not vote. So not only are they just opting out and losing the news, they are choosing not to engage in their community or care about the outcomes. It also says that local news encourages people to vote. It encourages young people to vote. And so there is a direct correlation between local news and the outcomes of our civic and community engagement. And without that, we have a hole, we have a gap, and then we end up in the land of, I'm going to tailor myself to go find the news that I want to get. Or I'm going to look for my favorite person and just go with whatever that particular station or entity says. And so what I think local news is, it brings it back to center, but it also has the added benefit of making a community, which we all want.
And I want to come back to you, Rita. What are the potential consequences when journalism is deliberately targeted or weakened in a democracy?
I would probably go back to look at the outcome. I mean, if you have no news, then you have a complete, we used to say, like in crisis management when I was practicing law, if there's no message, people make it up. And so the reality is, without that, without the news, without having that information, that quality news and information, A, people are making it up. They've got some misinformation or fake news. Or alternatively, we have a community that is disengaged. And I don't think any of us win when we have that.
And Dr. Kelly, I want to bring this one to you. What role do you see journalists playing in the upcoming national and Ohio elections, especially as candidates for office more often refuse to debate each other?
Well, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that question, honestly. I do think that the journalists play a critical role, but for the obvious reasons, right? If candidates choose not to debate one another, this is one of the ways that we know Americans frequently learn about the candidates. They don't tune in to the election for the whole thing. They tune in for a few key moments, and these debates would be one of those. So figuring out how to get the attention of the public and put the information in a way that the public can find digestible and compelling is a big challenge, and I would be really interested to hear what my colleagues have to say.
Well, I think I'll give you a real-life example here that we are dealing with as we speak. The Ohio issue 1 on the ballot in November is designed by the sponsors to end what they call gerrymandering of our political districts in Ohio. And the Ohio Ballot Board on Friday approved language that basically says the opposite of that it would encourage or require gerrymandering. And I'm not going to sit here and litigate which side is right or wrong here, but that is such a stark difference in opinions from the people who went across Ohio, collected all the signatures to get on the ballot, and those who are in power right now, that one of our roles is going to have to be to kind of discern who's right and who's wrong in that. So that's a big question that I think all the media in Ohio are going to have to delve into here in the next few weeks. There's a chance the Supreme Court could change the ballot language that was approved on Friday. Chance they won't. But, what does this issue really do? And it's complex, folks. It is not simple stuff to understand and figure out. And it's important to how our districts are drawn and who gets elected in November every 2 years here in Ohio. So that's a really good issue right there, just an example of how, what I was talking about earlier, the extreme of opinions is very, I don't want to say extreme again, but it's very strong. And our job of sorting through all that gets harder and harder every year. Just even things like the City Hall hacking mess right now, trying to discern what's right and what's wrong on a very technical issue is very difficult for journalists to do every day. So it is incumbent upon us to do all we can to understand it and report what we're told, but also have a healthy dose of skepticism behind that to sort through what these issues really are. So.
Before you come back to that, I want to, since you touched on something I'm interested in, you mentioned the data hack, and we talk about misinformation, and there has been a lot of, and I think this is something that everybody can relate to because they've been following this story, has the mayor's office been, open and honest with information, and it's our job as journalists to be accountable. How can we fairly hold politicians accountable when they may not have all of the information?
Well, I think it's, you have to have the ability to ask the questions. You have to have the ability for them to say, we don't know, or we do know, or this is what we believe to be accurate today. That's a tough situation, obviously, that the City Hall is dealing with right now. So to sort through all that and give us clear answers, I have some appreciation of that, but it's also our job to ask these questions. And, it's unfortunate that twice things did not work out the way they were said. And whether that's the reasons behind that, we don't know quite yet. We know what the mayor has said, but it's our job to kind of try to sort through that and give his answers and report all that information. And if it's disproven, then that's what happens. And not that we're setting out to do that, but it's also important. There was some really good work in this community last week of people going out and checking on what was said, and it turned out not to be quite true. And that was followed up, and then what the events went from there. So I think that's part of our role is to. For anybody, it doesn't matter who's speaking. If they tell us something, we got to double check it, make sure it makes sense. Some things are very easy to check, and some things are not. So we don't have access to the data to know what was taken and what wasn't taken. And I'm pretty sure it's a very difficult situation. So.
Rita, I know you wanted to expound on that other question.
I actually wanted to expound on redistricting and what we need to do in light of the upcoming election and issues like redistricting and the other issues that we've had to confront. We need to sometimes just break it down to basics. And so what I tell people a lot is most people don't even know what redistricting means to them, what impact it's going to have on their life, how the districts are going to be drawn. And so changing the language even complicates it further. But there are some people who need to, one, understand that. So we have a service to those who are our readers to explain what is redistricting, what does it mean to me? And then second, once that language is changed, without having an opinion or perspective, we have a duty to say, this is what was submitted, this is the change in the language, so that when you walk into that ballot box, that sounds old, really, doesn't it? When you go pull that lever, how about that? When you pull that lever, you can say, I am fully informed about redistricting. I know what's on the ballot. I know this language, and I can make an informed decision.
This is a question I have for both of you, well, all three of you. And Rita and Michael, you guys, I'm sure will answer this question a bit differently than Dr. Kelly. we talk about misinformation. We talk about the pressure that the media is under. We talk about the, hate, unfortunately, and many times for the media. Do you have a fear for the future of what's ahead for this business? And what I mean by that is, the younger journalists coming in. Do you see that, maybe students seeing this, pressure that we're under as journalists? I don't want to do this business. I don't want to get into this. I don't want to, take that pressure. And in turn, when we're not getting those younger journalists in, we don't have people in the community who are informing the community. So I'll ask you all, do you have a fear for, journalism and misinformation going forward and just the new line, the new crop of talent coming into the business? I'll start with you, and we can go on.
I don't have a fear. I have a concern. But I'll tell you, we had 6 outstanding interns work for us this summer of college students from across Ohio and one from Northwestern. And we were really impressed with their desire and ability to go out and cover news and do the stories that we need to do. So I have not seen a drop-off in talented young people who want to be journalists. It's a little different feeling and looking than it used to be, but that's okay. It's just changing times. So I think there are still young people who want to be journalists and who see the importance of the work. And actually, the events of the last few years have kind of reinvigorated that in a way to me because of how important it is. So I don't have a fear that that's going to happen. I think the bigger concern is, can we continue to support journalism through whatever means are necessary for every media that we have, watching, reading, buying subscriptions, et cetera. Do we have enough public support to keep that going is also, I think, one of the concerns that I would have too. But generally speaking, I don't have any concerns about the folks that we're seeing come into the business and who want to do great work and be great journalists. And a lot of them want to tackle big ideas and big projects right away. We have to kind of get them, let's walk a little more before we go run in full speed into bigger stories. So.
Dr. Kelly, from a student standpoint.
Sure, yeah. So when I try and imagine myself in my students' shoes, then I feel a little scared, right? Because it looks intimidating. There are questions about funding. There are all sorts of things. But when I talk to the students, when I look at what they do, fear goes away and it's replaced by maybe the optimism of youth. These students are so passionate and so good at what they're doing that it's hard not to just feel optimistic. Like, as Mike said, it has never been clearer how important good journalism is. And I think these students get that, and they want to contribute and try and be a part of the solution. So most of the time, when I'm looking at them, I feel optimism, even though if I was their parent, I'd probably be a little nervous.
I agree with Kelly. I have optimism and not fear. We have a program at Signal in each of our newsrooms called Documenters. And documenters are everyday people who are paid $18 an hour to do a civic side hustle. And in doing so, they attend government meetings, everything from city council to county commission to school board. I tell you about documenters because it's they're everything from 16 years old to 85 years old. Every demographic you can think of. I can tell you in our Cleveland newsroom, we had 2 documenters become reporters. So there is a quest for being engaged and being a truth teller. We have 500 documenters in Cleveland. That's 500 people who went through the training and signed up because they want to create government accountability. The numbers, as I understand it, at OU are up in journalism, and they're taking it back to pure journalism. I agree. They want to be part of the solution. They want to make a difference. It feels like the days of the 60s and the 70s. They're going to be radical, and they're going to change the world. So I have great optimism because they are purist about it. They are pure to the First Amendment, and they're out there using their civic engagement to move the needle in this community.
I like it. Well, it has been CMC's long-standing tradition to take audience questions. We'll move the questions to our live stream and in-person audiences in just a few minutes. If you have a question, please make your way to the microphone in the back. You see Doug standing right there. If you're joining us online, please type your questions into the chat before we take audience questions. Panelists, I do have one more very important question for you all, and this is for everybody. I'll start with Rita. What steps can be taken to strengthen journalism?
Well, I think it's interesting. I'm a nonprofit. Mike's for-profit, but we all lift up the media ecosystem. And so I think together we all win. A rising tide lifts all ships or boats. And so the reality is we continue to work together to educate, to inform, and to make our community better by using quality news and information. If we keep getting that news and information out to people, if we ensure that they know the difference between facts and misinformation, and we work in partnership to do that, then we win collectively as journalists, as news, as community, and as the state of Ohio.
So I think I'm basically going to echo that. Two things that come to my mind. One, support these papers, support these news organizations through advertising, through purchasing the papers and that sort of thing. And two, use it, like share it. Talk to people. When you're talking about how you reached your decision, refer to the news organizations on which you are making your conclusions, because that sort of reinforces to other people that the news matters and that decisions aren't just a matter of what feels right to you, but that there is empirical evidence out there in the world that can help you make choices that are good for you and your community.
I think the most important thing for any media is that we have to earn your readership, viewership. We have to do a good job. We have to provide strong, compelling journalism about things you care about, understand what the issues are in the community, in all parts of the community, all the diversity in this community in particular. We have to be able to understand what people want and deliver quality journalism. And it's going to look different because we're not just doing the paper anymore. We're doing the website and social media and all the channels that we're on. So it's going to look and feel a lot different than it did 10, 20, 30 years ago. But we have to provide quality journalism that matters and that is compelling. And we have to build the case for why people should support us and subscribe and watch, et cetera, for all the media. It is more than just the fact that we exist and you should come look at us. That's not good enough. We have to provide the quality product that you expect from us that's fair, that is, thoughtful, and, and holds those in power accountable when that should happen. And also when the community has success, celebrate that success when there's a good thing happening. So it's all those things wrapped into one, and it's a never-ending quest, and it's very challenging, obviously, in today's environment, but I think that's really important. That if we provide the community the news and information that it needs, I think the support will be there.
Doug, I'll let you take it away in the back.
Rodney, thank you very much, and thank you to today's panelists for a great conversation. If you do have a question, as Rodney says, please join us here at the microphone. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. If you're watching on the live stream, please type your question into the chat. Great questions at CMC always have those two things in common, right? They take less than 30 seconds to ask, and what punctuation mark do they end in? A question mark. Yes, thank you. Okay. So here's a question to start us off with. Nonpartisanship is a key pillar of good journalism. But if a political leader is labeling the free press as the enemy of the people, does that ever change the character of a reporter's coverage? Should it?
I would say it should not change how we cover, but it obviously gets our attention and requires us to be diligent in our work. To me, we treat every politician, every person the same as much as humanly possible. Although I remember in the past, I had a school superintendent, not here in Columbus, somewhere else, clearly lied to one of our reporters. And did we trust that superintendent less after that day? Absolutely. Trust is, a two-way street, I guess, too. If they're talking to us and trust us to do the right thing and explain stories properly, et cetera, a reasonable expectation can be made the other way, too, that they're giving us accurate and fair information on the best that they know at that point in time. So I don't think it changes how we go about things, but it certainly requires our diligence. And in some cases, we got to be better on our game to make sure that there is absolutely no appearance of bias in what we're doing, that we are going above and beyond to be fair and accurate.
I appreciate your comments, having been a reporter more than 60 years ago. But you have talked mostly about the news pages. Do different standards apply to the opinion pages? Should there be different standards, and what should they be?
The opinion pages are obviously where people express opinions. They are not places where you make claims that are not accurate or factual. Our ethics policy that we work under requires the facts that are shared in opinion columns to be held to the same standard as our news stories. So that is kind of the basis of that, the foundation of what we do. But there is a little more license there for people to share their opinion, their interpretation of what things mean, et cetera. But generally speaking, I'm trying to give a good example here, but if you write a letter saying something that's not true, we're not going to run that probably. We're definitely not going to run that. We may work with you on it. We may question it. But if you write something where you're saying this happened and I disagree with it because of X, Y, and Z, that usually generally will work, in broad terms.
I would add that one complicating factor there is that many people do encounter news content in other contexts. So they are on social media and they see someone has shared something, and there's at least some evidence to suggest that we aren't so attentive to the distal source. We aren't paying attention to where it originally came from. We're paying attention to where we saw it. So when you ask someone, where did this news come from? They don't say, oh, it was the opinion pages or it was the factual news. They say Facebook. And that matters.
We do put a label on all online opinion content, a big yellow reverse on the opinion word. So it does get pretty clearly labeled when you get into our site, but depending on people share on social media, that can be a bit of an issue sometimes.
I'm John Lowe, retired professor. I have several former friends who insist to me that January the 6th was not an attempt to overthrow an election, and they further say it was just a few crazies that got out of line, or that it was created by the FBI, or even that it's more like a panty raid than an insurrection. What do you say to those people, or what do you write about them?
I think our coverage speaks for itself. We have, I don't think the facts support those claims, and that's what we've reported on now for, nearly 4 years now. So I don't think that those facts are supported by what I personally saw on coverage, not personally there, but I think we can refute that as not being factual.
And I was going to add, we have a phrase in law called res ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself. I would agree with Mike. The coverage was obvious. It's a little difficult to argue with the pictures as it was going on at the time. But everybody has an opinion, and sometimes we can flip it to be convenient for whatever we will feel and believe. But at the end of the day, we need to be a community and a nation that believes in facts and truth. And sometimes when it's obvious, res ipsa loquitur.
Hi, my name is Raphael Davis Williams. I was a television reporter, broadcast journalist for about 14 years, so I have a little perspective here. And my question is actually to Dr. Garrett, and I mean no disrespect to our moderator, but when we have companies like Sinclair Broadcasting, which owns ABC6, and they are forcing stations across the country, hundreds of stations across the country, to give the same report, and it has a viewpoint perspective, how does that impact democracy and trust when it comes to news organizations?
Right, so you've asked me a question with a very specific research focus, and so the first proviso I have to offer is that that's an empirical question. It's a very important question. How does a more partisan news environment influence people's opinions? I can speculate that it would seem likely to be more influential than, say, for example, social media, to my mind. Because if you have a systematic network of news organizations that are advancing a particular political line, doing so in a way that is both consistent across time themselves and consistent with other networks, then it makes one of the best strategies we have for checking the facts, which is reading widely, less effective, because suddenly you can say, well, yeah, this is a regular news item. It's been occurring all across the country. It must be important. It must be true. I'm going to stop there, but there's a lot more to be said.
Well, if I can kind of weigh in on that, I have to weigh in, of course. And again, I'm not taking the company perspective. I'm not the company man. I'm just thinking logically here. I think that's, when it comes to Sinclair, I think that's a false narrative. And this is what I mean by that. Every news station, every company has affiliates, right? So let's just say, let's take NBC4. I'm gonna just use them. I'm gonna pick on them. They're a NBC affiliate, so they get certain feeds. They may get a package. Let's say if I'm doing a story on Donald Trump, and that comes down on an NBC feed. Every NBC station in the country can get that exact same story, which can happen. If you watch a story here in Columbus, guaranteed on NBC, that same story is going to be potentially in Chicago, in Dallas, in Austin, Texas, in 50 to 100 other cities, potentially. Same thing with CBS. And I think that when it comes to Sinclair, that's this narrative or this history of it being a conservative, company. And we're being forced to run certain things. I can only speak for our station. We aren't forced to run anything, but we do have kind of network affiliates for the company. We have folks who cover politics. They may be on, we actually have a reporter now at the DNC. So we have taken several of her reports, and stations across the country have used those same reports. So I think it's viewed as in, for some reason, Sinclair, it's this conservative viewpoint. They're pumping this false narrative into communities across the country when that's not the case. Literally every company, every station in the country is doing the same thing. It's all content. It's just like the Dispatch. The Dispatch may take something. I don't know all of their partners, but maybe they have a partnership with a paper in Austin, Texas. And it may be an article from a reporter in Austin, Texas in the Dispatch. The Dispatch isn't pushing any sort of narrative, but that's their newspaper partner, so they're taking that story and putting it into pages. So I think it's just the way you have to kind of think about that. And again, folks may think, oh, he's just taking a company perspective, but I'm just trying to give you a wider perspective of how news is disseminated across the country, especially from a television perspective.
Thank you very much. Richard Needles, joining us on the live stream audience, asked a little bit of a historical question here. What impact did the 1987 repeal of the Fairness Doctrine during the Reagan administration have on nonpartisan journalism?
Yeah, no, I'm going to have to pass on that one, too. I know better than to talk about things I'm not expert in.
I can't answer that one either.
Ditto.
Don't look at me, I'm the moderator.
Hello, my name is Lily Malone. I'm a student journalist in Chicago. I go to Loyola University, but I've also interned at a few other newspapers in Chicago. So, but my question is about student journalism because I'm the news editor of the paper, and I was the assistant last year and a writer my freshman year. So my freshman year, I obviously made my fair share of mistakes. Pretty much everything I know about journalism, although I am a journalism major, before I had even taken any journalism classes, I was writing for the newspaper. So majority of what I know is having learned it from the newspaper. And I'm curious how you handle mistakes, because we are human, and as much as we want to be perfect and always share the truth, sometimes there are mistakes, and especially as an editor at a student newspaper where I handle a lot of first-time writers, and they make a mistake, and then I get the emails from the university, and they're very upset with us, and I explain that we're student journalists, but sometimes they're a little bit unforgiving. So especially, I'm curious to hear from you, Dr. Kelly, about how you may approach something like that, and what we can do as student journalists to kind of not gain back that trust, but share our intentions and our good intentions as student journalists.
So I do have something to say, but I'd actually like to give the other panelists a chance to talk about how you deal with new journalists, because I'm sure mistakes happen. I'd love to hear your comments on that before I make a sort of larger response.
Sure. I think, look, every journalist is a human being, and they're going to make mistakes. It's what systems do you build into your daily routine to make sure that you minimize that as much as humanly possible. And I'm not talking about typos here. You're talking about more substantial mistakes of fact and so on. So I think, the great thing about journalism for me, and one of the reasons I got interested in early in my career, was I could do journalism in high school. I could do journalism in college and get that real practical experience every day of covering stories. And so it's one of the few fields you can actually go out and practice while you're before you even get your bachelor's degree and get a lot of experience, and that's very invaluable. So I think everybody's going to make mistakes sooner or later. It's having that good system in place to correct mistakes, make sure you get them out there to, like if a mistake's on the front page, the correction should be on the front page, those types of things. Do things that make sense to get that trust back, and work with your staff. Don't let them get discouraged by making mistakes. And also don't put yourself in situations where you're It's a very sensitive story, and you have a first-time reporter or second-time reporter doing the story, and your deadline's at noon today, and you're trying to edit and get that done. Avoid situations like that where you're going to put yourself in a pressure cooker you don't need to be in as you go about handling student journals. And that's advice for any media, really, right? You want to make sure you give yourself, put yourself in positions where you have time to do the quality work that the community expects and deserves.
I agree wholeheartedly. I'll go back to what you said, is nobody's perfect, and we understand that. And each opportunity you will grow in grace, and you'll know where you made your mistakes, and so you try not to make the same mistakes over again. So you have a system in place up front that tries to avoid the mistakes. But the reality, even as people, is if you own your mistake, and you correct it, as Mike said, you put it back on the front page if that's where you ran the story. But you correct it and you do your due diligence to say, I was wrong. People will respect that, people will trust you, and then they'll keep coming back to you. So I think it's the systems on one side, but it's also owning it and accepting the reality that you made a mistake. And then the last thing is, every now and then we all read something 4 or 5 times, and there's a point where you just give it to someone else and say, you read it for me, because I've read it too many times and I know what my head said, but it may not be in the paper. So you find you allow enough time for somebody else to double check, did I mean to say this? Did I say this correctly? And does this reflect the truth?
Yeah, so I have nothing to add to that advice, right? I'm 100% behind that. But this does give me an opportunity to say something else that I've been thinking as I've been listening to all of this conversation today. And that is, I sometimes worry when there is a conversation about mis and disinformation that it sucks all the air out of the room and doesn't leave space to think about all the other complicated ways that journalists and producers of news and information have to navigate the world. So if we are so fixated on mis and disinformation, then we lose track of the fact that journalists are human beings who sometimes make mistakes. We lose track of the fact that knowing what is true is not always easy. And we joke about how we've conflated facts and opinion, and isn't it silly that we can't do that? But in truth, that is actually a very difficult distinction to make at times. I mean, I can say, well, I'm a great professor. I'm a great teacher. Is that a fact? Well, I mean, I'd like to think so, but there's a lot that goes into making decisions about what claims are true. And sometimes it's simple, like, were there 100 people there or 1,000 people? But many times it's much more complicated, and it can't be distilled down to a simple, it's misinformation. The risk we run when we focus on fake news, misinformation, disinformation, is that that becomes bandied as a way of dismissing anything anytime something goes wrong.
Hi, my name is Dave Teal. I'm just a concerned citizen. I notice a lot of times things that are called fake news become real news. There's examples right now going on about all that. How do you folks handle that? And I can give you examples if you'd like.
Yeah, so I think that's actually very consistent with the point that I was just trying to make. The reality is really complicated and messy, and none of us have the time to deal with all that complication all the time. So one of the things that we rely on journalists and journalism to do is to distill what is the best available evidence tell us. Like, where do the experts land? Having surveyed all the evidence that we have, where do we conclude? That doesn't mean that reality is now stationary and fixed in time and will always be that case. Sometimes we learn later, oh, we were wrong. This seemed unlikely, but in fact it was true. That's not the rule. Most of the time, things that we figure out are correct, and the iterations that come along are nuance, adding more complexity to what we thought was the simple distillation. Well, it's not actually that simple. So I think many times those kinds of evolving understandings are taken as evidence that the system has failed. And I'd say it's just the opposite. The system is doing what it's supposed to. This is true of science. I think it's also true of journalism. If we learn new stuff, it's incumbent on us to share that new information and say, hey, we thought this was right. Turns out it's a little more complicated. That sounds like good journalism to me.
Yeah, I would simply say journalism is the first draft of history. Things do change. If something happens today, we think we know it happened because the vehicle ran out of gas or whatever the situation may be, and that may be proven to be just not true later. So I think that's perfectly natural to some degree. I'm not sure that's where fake news becomes real news at times. I guess that's true, but certainly things develop over time, and they change very rapidly in this digital age where people expect us to have, I remember once we had a crash happen in the community, and someone on Facebook is up there saying, well, who was in the car? What happened? What caused it? Well, we have no idea yet. It just happened. We just posted an initial story saying, avoid the area. So it takes time to get answers sometimes, and that's what gets confused with being fake, I guess, when we just don't have information yet. So,
Thank you. We have 3 minutes left.
Hi, I'm Nathan. I'm an ad maker, producer. I'm wondering, just kind of expand the dynamic of kind of playing to when you're writing headlines or creating kind of the lead for the story, is there a temptation to play to the algorithm to get the likes, to get the comments, to get the views that you may need to, sustain your business? And I'm wondering how news agencies should navigate that when you do have to kind of play, in the social media landscape, have to play to, to gain viewership.
I'm going to rephrase it and say it differently. If we go back to one of the things we talked about and I think we all said it, that we need to provide news that the community cares about, that interests the community, makes them want to read the story. Because the truth of the matter is that's what we want. We want them to read the story. So I'm not going to say it's about clicks. But what I am going to say is we want to have a headline on the lead that resonates but is consistent with the story. And so for us, it's important, if you go back to, I want to give you facts, I want to give you information, I want to give you news, but I want to give you a headline that makes you want to read those facts and information so you can take it away. It's less about the clicks and the social media, but it's more about, I want you to say, oh, this is interesting, let me take a look, because that's real, that's human, and that's what people do.
Yeah, if people are searching Google this morning, asking a question about something in the community, and we have the story that already answers that question or can quickly craft a story that answers that question, why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we, we don't create sensational headlines, but we create headlines that are factual and are designed to answer the questions the community is asking every day. And the one, whether this is good or bad, I'll leave to all of you, but one of the things that people do in our society today is you pull out your phone, you type in, I can't think of a phrase, you type in something in, who won the Ohio State game yesterday? That's how people get information, and that's how they get scores and things like that. So if we're not aware of that and doing some things to serve that audience in a responsible way, then we're not doing our job.
All right. Thank you all for those engaging, smart questions. Doug gave me the wrap, so I'll toss things over to Evelyn. Elaine, what did I say, Evelyn?
Hi, everyone. I wish we had more time. Oh, no, that's the wrong one. Ah. How about this side? Everyone, I hope you found today's community conversation engaging. I know I have a newfound appreciation for the importance of journalism in our lives and the challenges facing those who bring that to us. Thank you to today's forum partner, the Columbus Dispatch. Thank you to the Ellis for hosting us once again, and to the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch for supporting today's live stream. And our very special appreciation to today's speakers, Rita, McNeil, Danish, Kelly Garrett, Michael Shearer, and our hosts, Rodney Dunigan. Please register now to join us next week here at the Ellis for our next forum, The Invisible Problem Everywhere, Confronting the Gender Data Gap. Thank you again, everyone. We could not do this without you. Have a great afternoon.